A Winter Rescue in Yukon. Chapter 1. The Cabin by the Klondike. In the heart of Yukon, Canada, where the land stretched wild and untamed, a modest log cabin stood alone near the serpentine curves of the Klondike River. Its walls, hewn from the towering pines that surrounded it, bore the marks of careful craftsmanship, a testament to the man who called it home. Ethan Mitchell, a 45-year-old former wildlife photographer, had traded the clamor of Toronto's streets for this remote sanctuary 3 years prior. The city, once his world, had become a cage of memories after his divorce, each corner echoing with the life he'd lost. Seeking solace, he'd packed his belongings, sold his apartment, and driven north until the pavement gave way to gravel, then snow. The cabin was simple yet sturdy, built with the help of local trappers and hunters who'd taught Ethan the art of survival in this unforgiving wilderness. The main room doubled as a living area and kitchen, warmed by a cast-iron wood stove that crackled day and night. A small bedroom held a narrow bed and a weathered dresser, while an attached storage room, insulated and equipped with a small electric heater, housed Ethan's photography gear and extra supplies. The windows, though few, framed views of snow-laden pines and the river's icy gleam, a constant reminder of the beauty that had drawn him here. Ethan's companion in this isolation was Ranger, a burly Alaskan Malamute with a coat as thick as the winter itself. Ranger had been a gift from old Joe, a grizzled trapper who'd taken Ethan under his wing when he first arrived. "You'll need a good dog out here," Joe had said, pressing the squirming puppy into Ethan's arms. "One that can handle the cold and keep the loneliness at bay." Ranger had grown into a formidable presence, his sharp instincts and unwavering loyalty making him more than just a pet. He was Ethan's lifeline. Days in Yukon followed a quiet rhythm. Ethan rose with the pale dawn, stoked the stove, and brewed coffee strong enough to cut through the morning chill. After breakfast, he'd strap on snowshoes and venture out with Ranger, his camera slung over his shoulder. Photography, once his livelihood, was now his passion, a way to capture the fleeting moments of beauty in this harsh land. The golden light on a frozen river, the silhouette of a moose against the horizon, the delicate tracks of a fox in fresh snow. He no longer sold his work, but the act of framing a shot still brought him peace. As winter tightened its grip, the air grew sharp, and the days shrank into fleeting hours of light. Ethan felt the change in his bones, a subtle warning of the challenges ahead. He spent his evenings by the fire, listening to the wind howl through the trees, Ranger sprawled at his feet. It was a life of solitude, yes, but one he'd chosen, a life where he could heal. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Storm. One evening in late January, as Ethan sat carving a piece of pine into a crude bear figurine, his radio crackled to life. The sound was a rare intrusion, a tether to the world beyond his cabin. He set down his knife and picked up the microphone. "Ethan, you there?" Old Joe's voice rasped through the static. "Right here, Joe," Ethan replied, leaning back in his chair. "Storm's brewing. Weather Service says it's going to be a beast. Blizzard conditions, maybe worse. You got everything you need?" Ethan glanced at the stacks of firewood lining the porch, the pantry stocked with dried meat and canned goods. "Think so. Cabin's solid, and I've got enough to last a month if it comes to that." "Good man. Just hunker down and don't do anything stupid. I'll check in when it's over." "Appreciate it, Joe. Stay safe yourself." The line went quiet and Ethan turned the radio off, his gaze drifting to the window. The sky was a heavy gray, the kind that promised trouble. Ranger paced near the door, his ears twitching at the rising wind. "It's coming, boy," Ethan murmured, scratching the dog's head. "We'll be ready." Over the next day, he prepared with methodical care. He hauled extra wood inside, secured the shutters with thick bolts, and checked the generator in case the power failed. The storage room, with its precious heater, was his backup plan, a warm refuge if the main cabin grew too cold. By nightfall, the first snowflakes began to fall, soft and silent, a deceptive prelude to the chaos to come. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Snow. The storm hit with a vengeance the following morning. Ethan awoke to a world erased by white, the wind screaming past the cabin like a living thing. The thermometer outside had plummeted to minus 40 degrees Celsius, a number that turned breath to ice and skin to frostbite in minutes. Ranger growled low, his hackles raised as he stared at the window. "What's out there, huh?" Ethan asked, pulling on his parka. He trusted Ranger's senses more than his own. The dog had an uncanny knack for spotting trouble. Through the frosted glass, Ethan saw only swirling snow, a blinding curtain that hid the world beyond. Then Ranger barked, sharp and urgent, and Ethan grabbed his binoculars. Peering into the storm, he caught a glimpse of movement. Three dark shapes staggering through the drifts. As they drew closer, his breath caught. A massive brown bear lumbered forward, her fur crusted with ice, flanked by two small cubs. Their steps were faltering, the cubs pressed tight against their mother's side, shivering violently. Bears should be deep in hibernation now, curled up in dens until spring. Something had driven them out, perhaps a collapsed den or a desperate search for food. And now they were caught in a storm they couldn't survive. Ethan's mind raced. Every rule of wilderness living told him to stay put, to let nature take its course. A mother bear was dangerous, protective instincts honed to a razor's edge. But these weren't normal times. He watched as the cubs stumbled, their whimpers swallowed by the wind, and something stirred in him, a memory of helplessness, of a time when he'd needed saving and found it in unexpected places. "Ranger, stay!" he commanded, grabbing a flashlight. The dog whined, paws shifting, but obeyed as Ethan stepped into the storm. The cold was a physical force, slamming into him, stinging his exposed skin. He moved slowly toward the bears, keeping a safe distance. The mother raised her head, her dark eyes locking onto his. Exhaustion dulled her gaze, not aggression. She was too weak to fight, too desperate to flee. Ethan's storage room was their only chance. It was warm, dry, and separate from the cabin, a calculated risk. He trudged through the snow, the wind tearing at his clothes, and unlatched the door. With a deep breath, he swung it open and stepped back. "Come on," he said softly, his voice lost in the gale. "It's safe." The mother bear hesitated, sniffing the air. Then, as if sensing the warmth, she nudged her cubs forward. They stumbled inside, tiny bodies trembling, and she followed, casting a wary glance at Ethan before disappearing into the shadows. He shut the door quickly, his hands numb, and retreated to the cabin. Inside, Ranger was waiting, tail wagging uncertainly. "They're just guests for now," Ethan said, peering through the storage room's small window. The bears had curled up in a corner, the cubs nestled against their mother, already seeking the heat. For the first time since spotting them, Ethan exhaled. Chapter 4. The Heart of the Blizzard. The storm raged for 2 relentless days, a maelstrom of snow and wind that battered the cabin without mercy. Ethan kept busy, feeding the stove, cooking simple meals of beans and cornbread, and checking on his unexpected guests. The power flickered but held, the heater humming faintly in the storage room. Through the window, he watched the bears settle in. The mother, though still cautious, seemed to understand she was safe. She slept most of the time, conserving strength, while the cubs, warmed and rested, grew curious. They sniffed at the crates of supplies, pawed at Ethan's tripod, and tumbled over each other in clumsy play. He found himself smiling, pulling out his camera to snap a few shots through the glass. The mother's protective gaze, the cubs' innocent antics. It was a scene he'd never imagined capturing. On the second day, disaster struck. The power cut out with a sudden pop, plunging the cabin into darkness. Ethan cursed, fumbling for a lantern. The storage room's heater was dead now, and the temperature would drop fast. He couldn't let the bears freeze, not after bringing them this far. Rummaging through his supplies, he found an old kerosene heater, its tank half full. It was risky. Fire was a constant threat in a wooden cabin, but he had no choice. Bundling up, he braved the storm again, the wind nearly knocking him off his feet as he reached the storage room. The bears stirred as he entered, the mother's eyes glinting in the dim light. "Easy now," Ethan said, setting up the heater in a clear space. He lit it carefully, the flame casting a warm glow over the room. The cubs edged closer, drawn to the heat, and the mother watched, her nose twitching. As he turned to leave, one cub brushed against his leg, a soft nudge of curiosity. The mother huffed, calling it back, and Ethan chuckled. "You're welcome, little guy," he whispered, slipping out into the cold. Back inside, he stoked the stove and wrapped himself in blankets. Ranger pressed against his side. The storm howled on, but Ethan felt a strange calm. He was defying every instinct to help these creatures, and in doing so, he was finding a purpose he hadn't known he'd lost. Chapter 5. Dawn After the Dark. On the third morning, silence greeted Ethan like an old friend. The wind had died, the snow had ceased, and sunlight poured through the windows, turning the world outside into a dazzling expanse of white. He rose, stretching stiff muscles, and surveyed the damage. Drifts piled high against the cabin, but the structure held strong. First, he checked on the bears. Opening the storage room door, he found the mother awake, her ears alert. The cubs were wrestling nearby, their energy restored. "Time to go," Ethan said gently, stepping back. The mother bear stood, shaking off the last of her lethargy. She guided her cubs to the threshold, pausing to meet Ethan's gaze. In that moment, he saw gratitude, or perhaps he imagined it, a silent bond forged in the crucible of the storm. Then she turned, leading her young into the snow, their footprints marking a path toward the forest until they vanished among the trees. Ethan watched them go, a bitter-sweet ache in his chest. He'd taken a risk, broken every rule, and it had paid off. The rest of the day passed in a blur of shoveling snow and repairing minor damage. But the memory of the bears lingered, a quiet triumph. Chapter 6. Summer's Reckoning. Winter melted into spring, then bloomed into a vibrant Yukon summer. The landscape transformed, snow giving way to meadows of wildflowers, the river swelling with meltwater. Ethan adapted, spending long days fishing, hiking, and photographing the resurgence of life around him. Ranger bounded through the grass, chasing butterflies, a stark contrast to the stoic guardian of winter. Yet solitude, once a comfort, began to weigh on him. He missed conversation, the simple exchange of stories over coffee. One August morning, he decided to break his routine, driving his battered pickup to the nearest settlement for supplies. Ranger rode beside him, tongue lolling, as the road wound through mountains and past shimmering streams. The trip was uneventful until the return. Rounding a sharp curve, Ethan slammed on the brakes. A large brown bear stood squarely in the road, unmoving. His pulse quickened. It was her, the mother from the storm, her presence unmistakable. He honked, but she held her ground. Then the earth rumbled, a deep growl beneath his feet. Ahead, the mountainside collapsed, a torrent of rock and dirt swallowing the road in a deafening roar. Ethan stared, heart pounding. If she hadn't stopped him, he'd be buried. As the dust cleared, two cubs emerged from the trees, now sturdy and sleek, their coats gleaming in the sun. The mother bear turned, meeting Ethan's eyes one last time before leading her family into the woods. He sat in the truck, hands trembling on the wheel, awestruck by the symmetry of it all. Chapter 7. Echoes of Kindness. Back at the cabin, Ethan couldn't shake the encounter. He'd saved the bears out of instinct, a reckless act of compassion, and they'd repaid him in kind. The wilderness, harsh and indifferent, had shown him a thread of reciprocity he hadn't expected. That evening, he fired up the radio. "Joe, you there?" "Ethan, been a while, what's up?" "Got a story for you," Ethan said, and recounted the tale. The storm, the bears, the landslide. Joe listened, his gruff chuckles breaking the static. "Damn, Mitchell, you're crazier than I thought. Glad you're still kicking." "Me too," Ethan laughed. "Me too." Later, by the fire by the stove, Ranger at his side, Ethan opened his journal. He wrote it all down, every detail, preserving the memory of a winter rescue and a summer reprieve. The Yukon had tested him, shaped him, and in its wild heart, he'd found a lesson. Kindness could ripple outward, returning in ways no one could predict. And in that quiet cabin, surrounded by pines and river song, Ethan knew he'd found his place. Like and subscribe if you want to see more stories like this.